I've done videos on starters and finishers, on different kinds of storytellers. I've taken Myers-Briggs personality tests. There was something I did when I was at BioWare, which involved colors. I don't really remember what it was. We have different departments. Corporations come up with labels for different parts of the game buying public, like badass bards or conquering captains. We segment people by the generation they were born in. And I've also talked about how ideally we want the average game dev to think of themselves as a game dev first and not an artist or a designer or a programmer first. That we want people to be aiming towards a common goal as much as possible. And yet I still have done videos segmenting developers into different groups. I still think that departments are a useful construct. So what gives? How do I rationalize these two seemingly different things together? I worked with someone a long time ago who called these personality quizzes corporate horoscopes because they gave you a segment to belong to, but didn't really tell you that much. I think there can be some truth to that, but the reason why I actually think these segmentations can be useful might be a little different than what you're expecting. For me, one of the most powerful things of these categorizations isn't about what it tells you about yourself. It's about reminding you that other people can be different from you. And that reminder can help you interact with other people in a better way. It's natural and almost default that we assume that other people are like us, or if they aren't like us, that they are wrong. And quite often this isn't the case. People can think differently than us, can have different beliefs, can work in different ways, and can still be successful at doing the things that we need them to do. In some cases, their different approach can actually let them do things more successfully than we would be able to do them. One of the most common failures of a leader is to not give people the room to work in the ways that work for them, to not give them the opportunity to find their own path to the solution. Sometimes that's not going to be possible, but too often I see leaders effectively using the people who report to them as a second set of hands, where what they really should be doing is using them as another person that thinks differently than them, another person that has different approaches, another person that might come up with ideas that they wouldn't come up with. If we start from the assumption that everyone thinks like we do, and if they don't, they're wrong, then when we see someone working in a different way, we are going to try to correct that behavior. Because from our perspective, that behavior is wrong and is going to lead to a bad outcome. And sometimes that's true, but often that's not the case. Often that approach is as valid as our approach, might be more valid than our approach. Or even if it isn't, it's at least a valid approach. So these kinds of segmentations, like Myers-Briggs, like are you a starter or finisher, like what kind of storyteller are you, reminds us that other people can be other things, that other people can be successful in their own way. And best of all, that other people have strengths that we may not have. Now, we can take this much too far. People who really believe in these segmentations very, very strongly have a tendency to treat them as hyper rigid. This person is a Hufflepuff, so I shouldn't do something that requires them to be super brave because they aren't a Gryffindor. That assumes a rigidity that imposes a very tight box where the different segments are existing out very far from each other. The reality is, in almost all of these segmentations, the different groups overlap each other quite a bit. A person who is very comfortable as a storyteller probably can do story crafting as well. They may just not be as good at it, or they may not prefer it as their form of storytelling. The point isn't to say you are a Virgo, therefore I can't give you Capricorn things. The point is to remind you that the fact that you think in a certain way doesn't mean that everyone else thinks in a certain way. That other people have other ways of approaching things, of identifying your own strengths and weaknesses, and then looking for people who do think differently than you to cover those weaknesses, to help fill out the whole picture, to get something that is complete through a bunch of different people. One danger that can occur in the act of segmentation is that group similarities can get ignored in order to accentuate the differences. If we're doing a segmentation about what do people need to survive, we know that everyone needs food and water and shelter and things like that. So in the act of segmentation, what can happen is things like food and water and shelter can get shoved aside, and the segmentation ends up focusing on things like close friends or a group of colleagues or fulfillment in work, and ignoring those core things that apply to all of the groups. So be careful when you are looking at these segments. Try to understand what is common amongst all of the groups, because often what happens in the act of segmentation is those commonalities get hidden away or minimized in order to accentuate those differences. I've seen game teams fall into this trap, and because they've decided they're focusing on a couple of very specific player segments, say storytellers and explorers, they ignore the things that are common to most gamers, things like progression, and you can end up with games that end up being hollowed out because they're focusing on these leaf features that are unique to individual segments, because their segmentation isn't reinforcing the commonalities that exist between all of the segments. So while I think these segmentations can be overused, I do think understanding that there are different ways of approaching different things, different ways of approaching storytelling, different ways of approaching game dev, different ways of approaching time management, different ways of approaching interpersonal interactions. By remembering this, by remembering that we tend to favor one of those ways and that the other ways exist and are usually valid, it gives us more room to lead and to integrate different kinds of people into our organization. And that diversity of thought, that diversity of method can lead to a much more resilient organization that is able to explore a much more interesting space. If we all think exactly the same way, there are some advantages to that. It can allow us to move very quickly. It can allow us to go very deeply down a particular path. And that's great if that path leads where we need it to lead. But if it doesn't, it can be very difficult for a very uni-thought organization to course correct, to recover from taking the wrong direction. A more diverse set of voices is going to have more difficulty moving and changing because you are going to have to approach the different people in different ways. But because of that, it's going to have more resiliency when it needs to change direction, because to some degree, a few people have already explored the tips of several other paths, and you're going to be able to take advantage of that when you need to pivot. These kinds of segmentations are very useful at helping us understand ourselves, but also incredibly useful at reminding us that there are other ways to approach things, and that is good, that is valid, and that is something that we want to encourage within our organization. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. We also have a Patreon if you are more interested in supporting the channel in that way. Both members and patrons get access to our Discord. So if you're looking for a way to interact with the community to a deeper level, that is an excellent way to do so. What's your favorite corporate horoscope thing that you ever did? Did you find it useful? Did you find it silly? Did you ever do one that fundamentally changed the way you thought about yourself or about your interactions with other people? I've done a lot in my years, both for members of the dev community, but also in terms of talking about how players interact with games. Some of them I found useful and made me think about things in a different way. Some of them much less so. Let's talk about it down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.